Good evening, explorers! Welcome to another Native Nevada Nature. If this is your first time watching for the new season, this is an educational presentation for all ages to enjoy, watch, and learn about one plant or one animal species native to right here in our wonderful state of Nevada. I'm Explorer Torie with the Nevada Conservation League, and I'm here to teach you either about something you have never heard about in your whole life here in Nevada, or maybe it's something that is iconic to the desert here in our state. Either way, I hope you learned something and I hope you enjoy. This is a weekly presentation, somewhat weekly, so hopefully if you're joining back with us for the week, it's nice to see you again. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, just go ahead and type them in the Facebook comment section. And once we're done with the presentation, I will answer all of your questions. But this is a very special Native Nevada Nature because it is the first one of the new season. And although I'm a few months late for the holidays, this is our holiday edition of Native Nevada Nature. So 'tis the season. If you can probably guess just by this one image what our topic is going to be, you might be correct. That's right, it is desert or mistletoe to be specific. Although the mistletoe I'm going to be talking about is not the type that you'll see usually hanging on your Christmas tree or above your mantle that you'll probably be able to find in European days. Nope, this is the mistletoe you can find right here in Nevada, and that is desert mistletoe. Does look quite a bit different from your holiday mistletoe, and we'll go into the details of that later. So there are over 1,500 species of mistletoe, but the data and information I'm going to be presenting on today is very specific to desert mistletoe. There are a dozen or so more mistletoe that you can find in Nevada, but desert mistletoe is a very special one that we're going to be talking about. The genus species of desert mistletoe is Dendrum Californicum. Dendrum literally translates to tree thief because if you didn't already know, mistletoe is a parasite, meaning it draws nutrients from their host tree and host plant. Dendrum is the genus of mistletoe native to warm, temperate, and tropical regions of the Americas. It is the center of diversity in the Amazon rainforest. Dendrum is the largest genus of mistletoe in the Americas, and quite possibly the largest genus of mistletoes found nowhere else in the world. Californicum, meaning from or of California, hinting that desert mistletoe can be found in California and a lot of other southern states. Fun fact, the name mistletoe comes from two Anglo-Saxon words. First one, mistle, which means dung, and tan, which means twig or stick. So you can literally translate mistletoe as poop on a stick. Not exactly romantic as we would usually depict it, but we'll go into that definition later on. Really quick, I just want to touch on the differences between mistletoe and dwarf mistletoe. You can find both in our desert across Nevada, so I just wanted to touch base on it. So on the left-hand side, I have our good old desert mistletoe, and on the right-hand side, I have some pictures of some dwarf mistletoe. Both of them are obligate hemiparasitic plants, meaning that they are mostly parasitic, but some or most of them have some green parts, which means they are still able to photosynthesize and draw their own nutrients from the sun. However, most of the time they will just take what they can from their host plant, infecting them and stealing away their resources. Dwarf mistletoe can usually be found on conifer species, so a lot of woodland species will be infected with dwarf mistletoe, whereas mistletoe, at least this mistletoe, is infecting other species of trees and not just specific to conifers. And as dwarf mistletoe states, it is a little tiny, small little plant or infection that plants up onto the base of the stem. Mistletoe tends to be a little bit bigger, though if it's infected in multiple places, it can seem like the clusters are much bigger than this small little bunch. But let's get back to desert mistletoe, how to identify it. In the trees and the bushes of the desert region, desert mistletoe often looks like a dense nest or hive, like a big collection of leaves, as you can see in the bottom right-hand corner picture. In reality, though, desert mistletoe is a dense cluster of brittle, jointed green stems that are primarily leafless. The leaves have been reduced to tiny little scales. The clusters tend to hang down from the host, and they can grow up to lengths of 36 inches in about 6 to 8 years. Pretty huge. The mistletoe have small greenish yellow flowers that bloom in about January to March. They have a strong, fragrant perfume that comes out, so you might be able to notice that from afar. And then shortly after blooming, the flowers produce an abundance of red fruit, and that's probably what you'll notice most if you go up closely to this plant, are these tiny little fruits, some called berries. Usually they're red or faded into white. You can kind of see this close up from this video of my mom holding some desert mistletoe fruit. All right, let's go into where we can find some desert mistletoe to be specific. It is a common perennial plant found in the Mojave and Sonoran deserts, usually located under 4,000 feet in elevation. What that means is you can find it in Southern California, Nevada, Arizona, Sonora, Sonora, and Baja California. It is well adapted to arid environments, hence being in the desert, and that's probably why those leaves are really reduced to tiny scales to help with that water conservation. All right, let's talk about habitat. Being parasitic, desert mistletoe tends to inhabit other trees. A lot of other desert trees or trees you can find in riparian areas, washes, places with water. The common varieties of trees it will infect are mesquite, palo verde, ironwood, the occasional catclaw acacia, creosote bush, and some varieties of desert buckthorn shrubs. All of these are prime hosts for these slow-growing invaders. All right, let's talk about the life of a desert mistletoe. What is it like to be a parasite among trees? So desert mistletoe, during the winter, it produces its inconspicuous fragrant flowers that I mentioned before. And then their seeds can germinate on any branch of the tree, but usually the small root-like structures called historia can only penetrate through thin bark. The historia grow through microscopic places between the host plant cells, extracting water from the host xylem and nutrients from the host cells. Once the historia penetrates and begins to grow within the tree branch, it takes between 2 to 3 years or so for the first shoots of the brittle stems to grow. Once the stem growth begins, it takes another year for maturing before the desert mistletoe begins to produce fruit. Scientists have calculated that plants can grow grow with their hosts for over 60 to 70 years. What that means is, if desert mistletoe is a killer, it is surely a very slow one. Death by host is very uncommon because usually it doesn't take that much nutrients and it doesn't kill it off. It usually only occurs when there's multiple clusters of mistletoe that overtake the host tree, or when the host tree is infected with other diseases or lack of water. Now, you may be thinking, Explorer Torie, why would anybody want desert mistletoe. Sounds really bad, right? Stealing nutrients from other trees? Well, let's look about the role the desert mistletoe plays in the community. So the seeds of the fruit are covered in a gelatinous material, makes them really, really sticky. They are a favorite food for birds in the desert, and they often get sticky seeds stuck to their beak and stuck to their feet. As they wipe their beaks and feet clean of another branch, the mistletoe seeds now become planted on a new potential host. And since the seeds also have a really tough seed coat, they can easily pass through the bird's digestive system and become deposited onto new branches through their droppings. Hence, mistletoe, dung on a stick. You'll never forget the definition of mistletoe now. Mistletoes, all mistletoes contain toxins, visotoxins, phototoxins. All these toxins are concentrated and they can lead to slow the pulse, increase blood pressure, and cause convulsions and cardiac arrest. Eating green parts of any mistletoe can cause gastrointestinal upset and diarrhea. Despite the toxic qualities of the green parts of desert mistletoe, there have been some desert creatures that have evolved or adapted to the immunity of these toxins. For example, the desert mistletoe has an obligate host, which means that this particular species solely depends on desert mistletoe for its larvae, and that is the great purple hair streak, which is this beautiful butterfly pictured over here. They use the mistletoe as food for plants in the larval stage. And it also provides winter forage for deer. However, the most well-known and most common species that is associated with desert mistletoe is actually called the phainopepla. So the phainopepla, also known as a silky flycatcher, is a small desert bird that seems to have a very special relationship with the desert mistletoe. This black male phainopepla kind of looks like a miniature cardinal. The mistletoe berries are the bird's main food source in the winter, and as such, the phainopepla is one of the birds primarily responsible for the distribution of these desert mistletoe seeds. Desert mistletoe provides phainopepla with food, water, shelter, and nesting sites. And in return, the phainopepla helps spread the mistletoe across other trees. Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail on the phainopepla because that's actually going to be my next native Nevada species. Spoiler alert. You can watch that on Facebook Live January 27th at 5 p.m. We are not doing a Native Nevada Nature next week due to the inauguration, so you'll just have to wait 2 weeks to learn a little bit more about this wonderful desert bird. All right, let's talk about the history of mistletoe and desert mistletoe. So fossil records have shown that mistletoe has existed for millions of years. Recent data, recent as 2021-ish, they've shown that it could even be as late as 55 million years. You gotta think about that this plant has had millions and millions of years to specialize on very specific targeted host trees to infect them and steal away their nutrients. Let's go over the romantic overtones, the festive overtones that mistletoe has on our society. Most people will know mistletoe as the Christmas celebrative decoration. And if you want to know how that came about, it actually started with Celtic Druids in the 1st century AD. Because mistletoe could blossom, especially even during winter, the Druids came to view it as a sacred symbol of vivacity, and has then administered it to humans and animals alike for their hope for restoring fertility. There's even another mistletoe folklore that comes from Norse mythology. As the story goes, when Odin's son Baldur was prophesied to die. They went to consult the unassuming mistletoe, and the god was able to resurrect Baldur from the dead. Delighted, Baldur's mom declared the mistletoe the symbol of love and vowed to plant a kiss on all those who passed beneath it. So therefore, mistletoe's associations with fertility and vitality continued through the Middle Ages, and by the 18th century it became widely incorporated into Christian celebrations. Just how it came to be a sacred herb for the holiday decoration is still up to debate. But the kissing tradition appears to have the first caught among several servants in England before spreading to the middle classes. After part of the early custom, men were allowed to steal a kiss from any woman caught standing under the mistletoe, and refusing it was bad luck. Of course, none of those deep lore have anything to do with our desert mistletoe, despite being the same mistletoe. Our history for desert mistletoe goes back to some indigenous tribes. A lot of them use the sweet mistletoe for fruits to eat. They ate the mistletoe fruits that grew on mesquite, ironwood, and acacia, and they avoided the fruits that grew on desert buckthorn and palo verde, stating that they were bitter and considered inedible. The tribes of the river Pima crushed the berries and made a sweet pudding out of it. The Seri people were also known to make a strong medicinal drink by boiling the plant's jointed stems. However, as I reminded you previous slides ago, all mistletoes carry phytotoxins and a bunch of nasty toxins. However, several accounts state that the desert mistletoe is the only edible mistletoe, and the berries only. With that being said, don't take Explorer Torie's word. I would not go out and eat mistletoe berries, especially since they have so many toxins in their stems. Don't use this as a way to go out and go eat stuff in the wild. Trust me on this. In the Sonoran Desert, there is still people who sell stalls of desert mistletoe during the holidays, despite it not being the traditional European mistletoe. But it might be a great tradition we can do here in the desert, having our own version of mistletoe in our door frames. All right, now that we've covered the history of mistletoe and desert mistletoe, let's look more towards the future. What is the conservation status of desert mistletoe? There are several different types of species of mistletoe that are listed as either threatened or endangered. However, the desert mistletoe's conservation status is actually listed as unknown. There haven't been really any current studies on population or stability effects here in our desert. By the way that it's infecting, I would think it would be proliferating. But one thing to note is that mistletoe is a natural and valuable part of our ecosystem. It provides highly nutritious food and shelter for a variety of wildlife species, including birds, bighorn sheep, white-tailed and mule deer, livestock, butterflies, bees, beetles, weevils, spider mites, moths, many other insects. Lot of species depend on mistletoe. So therefore, mistletoe as a whole is seen as what's called a keystone species. They are not focusing on the decline or the uphill of their population, but they want to conserve it because so many other different species, especially endangered species, rely on this one sole plant species. The presence of desert mistletoe in a habitat provides for greater diversity, increasing variety of the species, as well as increased numbers of individuals. So the next time you see this ugly clump of desert mistletoe infecting the tree, take a closer look. You might find a concealed nest of birds, roosting screech or elf owls, the great blue hair streak caterpillars, or any number of other creatures in this area. In fact, Just given how valuable mistletoe is to many wildlife species, there have been even some scientists who have suggested that we actively cultivate and include it in areas undergoing restoration efforts. So we'll see how that goes in the future, but in the end, make sure not to overlook something because it looks dead or it's like a clump infecting a tree. May just be something that is keeping the desert here alive, vibrant, and full of biodiversity. All right, that's all I have on desert mistletoe. I'm opening up the floor to questions. If you have any questions about desert mistletoe, mistletoe in general, the festive holiday seasons, or even just wildlife or conservation efforts in Nevada in general, go ahead and just type them in the Facebook comment sections. By the way, all the videos and pictures of desert mistletoe that were featured on this presentation were all taken at the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. This was at Corn Creek Field Station, which is known as the beginning of the Desert National Wildlife Refuge. It's a nice little area where you can walk around, plenty of trails, but they have huge clumps of desert mistletoe. You can get up close, even pick off a berry if you want. You can definitely see a ton of wildlife that totally utilizes this berry, this fruit. So if you want to get an up close and personal look at desert mistletoe, definitely recommend checking that out there. Is desert mistletoe related to Old World mistletoe? The answer to that is not really. I would have to see what type of Old World mistletoe species that it specifically is. But as far as I know, that the mistletoe that you find here in America is not really related to this European mistletoe. They do have same origins. They're all mistletoe. But definitely from the looks of it, they do not look very similar. And they also infect different host plants. So related, far along, closely related, not really. Does desert mistletoe grow year-round? That's a really good question. So it thrives year-round. It's a perennial, which means that it's pretty much around year-round. It doesn't die back and then come back. So if you see a tree infected with mistletoe, usually be a big clump of desert mistletoe in that same exact area year-round. They will release their pollen and their flowers in January and March, and shortly afterwards they will release their berries as well. A lot of desert mistletoe release their berries in the winter season, which makes it a great food source for winter desert animal species, because in some cases life in the desert is really hard in the winter, and it may be their only food source available. Do Indians back in the day use it as paint as well? I couldn't find any historic uses for desert mistletoe as a paint. I did see some modern uses of desert mistletoe berries as a coloring for paper. It turns it into like a blackish or grayish, blackish, beige color. I'm assuming that use was brought on from historic uses. I just was not able to find the source. But to answer your question, yes, in some respects it can be used as a paint or a colorer. I just don't know about if Native Americans used it in that regard. Why does it flower and fruit in the winter? That's a very good question. My guess is that a lot of desert species, they usually flower in the spring or the fall due to the better weather. Here in the desert, we have kind of the nice thing about it is that we can utilize great weather all year round. I mean, our winters aren't super harsh, so flowers and plants can get away with blooming or blossoming in the wintertime where there's no snow or bad weather. It may also be that there's more rain in the winter, and therefore, since they're relying on the nutrients from plants, they get a water source because our rains work in the wintertime. Maybe they have more nutrients to take up, and that's why they have adapted to doing things in the winter time. So I don't know the exact answers, but if I had to look at it from a scientific perspective, that's what I think it would be. Does it go residentially or around parks? That's a really good question. And I want to say the answer is yes, but unfortunately, because of the aesthetics of desert mistletoe, if I went back to that picture of that big old clump in the tree, it's not very aesthetically pleasing. And so therefore, if we have any native plants within our parks or our neighborhood regions, for instance, you might see a lot of mesquite trees. If they are infected with desert mistletoe, unfortunately, I foresee that landscapers will actively take out or try to get rid of as much as the mistletoe in that area. So it might be worthwhile if you see any mistletoe infecting parks or areas in your neighborhood or even in your own backyard, make sure to not touch it. It may not look super aesthetically pleasing, but so many different wildlife, birds in particular, will rely on those berries and those fruits in the wintertime. So just keep that in mind if you do see it. All right. I think that was the last question I have. If any of you guys have any further questions about desert mistletoe or you think about it once we're done with this presentation, you could just type it in the Facebook comment section and I will make sure to answer it after this. But I want to thank you guys for joining me for another Native Nevada Nature. I always enjoy teaching you guys about something and answering my own questions and learning things myself. But as we start the new year, I want to invite you guys to our Welcome Back events. Here at the Nevada Conservation League, we are going to be starting the new year right. We have a new legislation, a new president, a new climate strategy. So many things are coming out, and we want to welcome you guys back in as volunteers. So I'm inviting you to two upcoming events we have. The first one is a game night. This will be Friday, January 22nd at 5 p.m. This game night will feature fun Jackbox games, things that we'll be playing online together. So make sure to join in on that if you think that's interested. If playing video games doesn't sound like your jam, you can join us for bingo. That will be Saturday, January 23rd at 3 p.m. We'll be playing environmental bingo, all virtual. You might be able to win a prize with it as well. So join us for bingo on Saturday or game night on Friday. We'll get you back in the swing of things, have a fun time, socialize, but we'll make sure to give you information on how you can get involved with the Nevada Conservation League. And as I mentioned before, we will not be doing a Native Nevada Nature on January 20th due to the inauguration. But we'll be back on January 27th where I will be teaching you about Phainopepla, the famed bird species that relies solely on desert mistletoe. It's a beautiful bird. It'll be a great episode. Hope to see you guys there, 5 p.m. Facebook Live, 2 weeks from now. But thank you guys for joining me with Native Nevada Nature. We are always focusing on, public lands, environmentalism, conservation. So we'll keep you updated as things come along. And until next week or 2 weeks from now, keep on exploring.